Hello, and welcome to the ninth episode of the weekly football talk. I'm once again your host, Lee Lublin, and this week I'm going to do something a little bit different. Because it was Halloween yesterday, I honestly wasn't able to watch enough of a single game to give an honest and good recap, in my opinion. So instead, I kind of want to talk about something really interesting that happened yesterday, and that was four backup quarterbacks ended up either having to come in mid game or started the game and ended up winning. And I can't think of the last time four backups ended up winning. And when I say backup, I'm not talking about someone for example, Taylor Heineke's a backup. Byron Fitzpatrick was the starter to start the year, but Heineke has started a ton of games, and I would also put Heineke probably near the top of the backups. What I'm talking about are pure backups. If you had asked me before the year about these four quarterbacks, I would have probably put them in the bottom 10 of all the backups in the league. Yet all four of them came out, did their jobs, and won their games. So I'm going to talk about the two quarterbacks who more just didn't make any major mistakes, less so than leading their team to victory. And then I'm going to talk about the two quarterbacks that I think could argue actually did lead their team straight up to victories. So the first quarterback I want to talk about is Trevor Siemian. Trevor Siemian was the only quarterback who actually came in mid-game out of this group. He ended up having to replace Jameis Winston early in the second quarter after Jameis looks like unfortunately tore his ACL. Prayers up for Jameis. Hoping for the best for him, especially since it looks like he was starting to turn his career around in New Orleans. But Trevor Siemian came in, immediately led, I believe, a touchdown and field goal drive to give the Saints a pretty nice lead against the Bucs. That was enough for, even though they kind of stalled in the second half, that lead was just big enough that New Orleans was able to secure the late victory, with Trevor Siemian actually leading a game-winning field goal drive. So if you looked at his stats, he didn't throw for 200 yards. He only had one touchdown, but no turnovers, and just kind of played a nice, clean game. I don't know how well he's going to do going forward, but this was a big win for New Orleans, and Siemian did a really good job coming in relief for Jameis. Now the other three, all three of them ended up actually starting the entire game. And the second one I want to talk about, and the other more game manager than game winner, is Geno Smith. Geno Smith he's been actually starting now for 2 weeks. This is his fourth game playing this season. And he, once again, like Siemian, he didn't do anything super major, but he also played pretty much no mistakes. And unlike Siemian, who was playing one of the better teams in the league in the Buccaneers, Geno Smith was playing probably one of the worst teams in the league in the Jacksonville Jaguars, and the scores kind of show it. Seattle, even with Geno Smith, was able to blow out Jacksonville 31-7. Next, I want to talk about the first quarterback who I think you can maybe make a case he actually was kind of leading his team to the victory, and that was Cooper Rush for the Dallas Cowboys. They ended up beating the Minnesota Vikings 20-16. And he ended up having a solid day. Unlike the other two quarterbacks I just talked about, he did make a couple of mistakes, but he also threw for over 350 yards and had a couple touchdowns. And unlike Geno, at least, he played a much better team in the Minnesota Vikings and was able to scrounge out a victory. And then finally, in my opinion, the most impressive of all the four backups yesterday, and also the one I knew far and away the least about going in, was Mike White for the New York Jets, who was starting his first NFL game ever. Same thing with Cooper Rush, by the way. I forgot to mention that. The difference is Cooper Rush has been on an NFL roster for years now. This is Mike White's second year in the NFL. And Mike White, he ended up throwing for over 400 yards and 3 touchdowns. And that was after a stretch where he looked very bad. It's about a half of a quarter, threw 2 interceptions. It looked like he was just going to, after a nice start, he was just going to completely tank. But he ended up rebounding and ended up leading the Jets to a very, very impressive win over the Cincinnati Bengals, who were looking like one of the best teams in the AFC, 34-31. So very impressive stuff from Mike White. And unlike the other 3 quarterbacks, he might, if he continues to play like this, he might have a shot of taking the starting job from Zach Wilson, because Zach Wilson has not started out the most impressive, and I've already seen a fair bit of fans calling for Mike White. Obviously, I personally think Zach Wilson's going to come back from his injury and take over the starting job again, and don't see Mike White having another game like this, but if he keeps playing like he did against the Bengals, it's going to be really hard to take him out for Zach Wilson. But yeah, we probably have another week of Mike. We have at least one more week of Mike White, possibly, especially after his performance. I think we have another week of Geno Smith, and unless New Orleans signs someone, Trevor Siemian might be their starting quarterback for the rest of the season. So it'll be very interesting to see. And then Cooper Rush, Dak Prescott's going to be back next week. This is probably Cooper's only game for the year. But it'll be interesting to see if this is a trend that continues. And honestly, the reason I want to talk about this is to kind of make the point, because I think a lot of people don't really realize this. If you're in the NFL, you are a good football player. Even the backups are still incredibly good football players. And I think that sometimes gets lost on the common fan. So I just wanted to highlight these 4 backups and show that even though I personally thought they were some of the worst backups in the league, they are still good enough to win teams' football games. So that is it for this week. Next week will be my midseason standings look, just looking at all the teams, seeing where things stand, maybe starting to make some playoff predictions because we're a little bit closer. And that is it. Thank you so much. See you guys next week. Like and subscribe. Peace.